Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 32. Today in the show, we're sharing updates on the 2014 rut, and then are joined by Jared Scheffler of Whitetail Adrenaline to discuss extreme rut hunting tactics. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, and we have got just an amazing show for you today, but I might be a little bit biased. Today, Dan and I are going to be talking a bit about how our rut vacations have been going so far here in week number 2, and then we're going to be joined by Jared Scheffler of Whitetail Adrenaline to discuss some extreme rut hunting tactics. Now, for those that aren't familiar, Jared produces the Whitetail Adrenaline DVDs, which are some of the most unique, most intense hunting videos you will ever see. It's all about public land, all on the ground, and stalking with a bow or gun, and it's just plain crazy. So trust me, this is going to be some really interesting stuff to talk about. But before we get to all that, I've got to catch up with my buddy, Mr. Dan Johnson. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going. There's deer in the woods, that's for sure.
Well, that's a plus. I'm glad to hear that.
That is. Yeah, I mean, me and Ryan are hunting hard, haven't taken a day off, hunted absolutely every day since he's gotten down here. There was one morning where we were waiting for a wind to shift directions completely. It was like right at first light, it was going to be going from a south to a northwest. And so we didn't hunt that morning. We waited to get into the stand at about 9:30 and then hunted the rest of the day there. Just didn't want to take the chance of having a wrong wind direction. But other than that, we've been hard at it, man. It doesn't, the way we hunt, you know, people always say, oh, no one hunts harder than this guy or no one hunts harder than this guy. But I'll tell you right now, the way that we're running and gunning, and you know, we had all these trees trimmed out at the beginning of the year, and I think we sat in maybe 1, 2, 3 sets that were pre-trimmed trees. Everything else has been a running gun. So,
wow,
we're getting after it.
Sounds like it. So, what did you guys start November 1st? Is that right?
Yep. We just finished up day 11.
Man, so you're definitely pretty exhausted, I imagine, at this point, huh?
Right. We are. We're tired. We're grumpy. We're cold now that this cold front moved through. But that should be the trigger to get us back to where we need to be. I know if you follow the Nine Finger Chronicles Facebook page, or I know I've talked to you a little bit about it. Ryan missed a stud one. He's probably low 180s, high 170s the other day. And fortunately, we saw him again last night, cruising through an area. He's back on trail cameras.
Nice.
So, I don't know. The saga continues.
Yeah. So how's Ryan holding up after that? I imagine that was pretty tough for him.
I tell you, just like anybody would be, he was a little sick about it, down on his luck, but he knew that, it's Iowa, anything can happen. And he took it better than I probably would have, to be honest with you. The guy is, long story short, it's not exactly what he does, but he's an anesthesiologist or like a nurse something. And in his job, if he makes a mistake, people die. So he knows how to deal with pressure. And not to make an excuse for him missing, and he wouldn't never want an excuse made for himself, but it was pretty windy that day. And the tree we were in was blowing, and I think that had something to do with it, to be honest with you. But like I said, man, giant missed. There's nothing you can really say except, tighten up your bootstraps and get back at it.
That's all there is to it. You're absolutely right. Got to keep on grinding.
That's right. So I saw that you laid down an awesome buck. I want to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, my rut vacation since the last time we recorded, it's come a long ways. Some good things have happened. It's been a heck of a week. When we had talked last, it was last week Tuesday, and I just left Indiana after hunting there for 5 days and drove down to my Ohio property. Well, we got down to Ohio and started hunting Wednesday morning, the 5th, me and my buddy Josh, and I pulled trail camera cards on our way into our stand that morning and checked those pictures, and right off the bat, on October 23rd, I had pictures of Jawbreaker. The buck that, as you well know, that I've been hunting him like crazy. He's the buck we talked about in episode 28, I think, that I had hit back on October 16th and couldn't recover him. And, in the 2.5 or 3 weeks since then, it's been with me ever since, haunted me, just really impacted me. So the fact I got these pictures that I thought were Jawbreaker just blew my mind. And I was on cloud nine, just an enormous amount of relief to think that he was still alive. So I was stoked. November 5th, was really excited. Hunted all day, saw a few does, but nothing much. But going home that night, I was just reinvigorated. After that whole time in Indiana, as we talked about last time, was really slow. But this just got me really excited again. And I talked, to my buddy Josh with the fact, I think it's gonna be Jawbreaker or bust. He is the buck I want. I want to close that loop. I want to right that wrong. I made whatever mistakes I made the first time around. I wanted to close it out now. So that was my plan. So that night, I'm thinking, as I do, Dan, I'm just racking my brain, overanalyzing every different piece of data I have about what I know or what I knew Jawbreaker used to do and what I know about the current conditions and the wind and weather and what the does should be doing and this thing and that thing. And I decided that I thought I knew the perfect place I had to be the next morning. So I got up at 3:15 or 3:30 in the morning so we could drive to the property and get out there well before daylight in time for me to sneak into this area and actually hang a portable stand. So this spot, I want to describe the spot a little bit because it was really just a dynamite rut hunting spot, in my opinion, kind of a perfect rut hunting stand. So this was an area, there was a popular doe bedding area just upwind of me. So I wanted to be sitting just downwind of this doe bedding area, which is some really thick CRP and brush and stuff. So I was downwind of the bedding, and then I'm on this little piece of high ground on the downwind side of this bedding area, and there's a barbed wire fence, an old farmer's fence that runs across this finger of timber that I'm sitting next to. And there's one section of that barbed wire fence that's down, and that is right on this downwind edge. And so what you got here is I'm downwind of a doe bedding area, so bucks should be cruising downwind during the rut, checking that bedding area for does. But then if they do that, the one place they can cross is this little fence crossing. And so it's a funnel downwind of a bedding area. And then to make it even better, right behind me, downwind of me, is a big, steep ravine. So nothing can get downwind of me. All my wind blows back over the steep ravine that no deer go into, no deer cross it. So it's just kind of a bulletproof set. I was downwind of a bedding area, I was in a funnel, and I couldn't be winded. So I just went into this knowing I was in a great spot, and on top of that, I'd picked this bedding area to hunt because it was right adjacent to one of Jawbreaker's most common places he used to bed and hang out. So I went in there with really high hopes. And, I got set up. It was one of those things where I got there in the morning, and like I said, I knew the specific spot I want to be at, but since I didn't have a stand, I went in there with a portable and was looking around and got to the spot I wanted to be, but there just was not any good trees right where I needed to be. So I spent maybe 10 minutes, maybe more, just kind of standing there looking around in the dark. I could just see the silhouettes of the trees, walking from this tree to that tree. Can I make this one work? Will this one be okay? Should I go with this one? It was kind of the dilemma was, do I go with a tree with better cover, or do I go with a tree that's in the right spot? Because the only tree I could get to in the right spot was one of those kind of beanpole type trees, just kind of narrow, tall, and not a lot of branches and cover on it. And I knew it wasn't going to be great for, concealing me up there. But in the end, I thought long and hard about it and decided I had to be in that spot if I wanted the best shot. And I thought, at the very least, I could get really high up in the tree, and then I could put the tree stand on the backside of that tree so that anything moving through where the deer would be coming from, I would have that tree trunk in between me and those deer. So it gets daylight. It was really cold. The cold front had hit. It dropped down maybe like 20 degrees since the day before. There was a little bit of light rain coming in and out, and it was just one of those perfect mornings. And about 8:15 or so, I hadn't seen any deer yet that day until 8:15. I look up, and I just see these antlers kind of rise out of the tall grass in front of me. And immediately I knew it was a shooter, giant buck. And long story short, he starts coming in my direction. I'm getting excited. Excuse me. As I see him, I turn on the camera, and at this time he's probably 100, 150 yards away. And as you know, we talked about during the episode where I talked about Jawbreaker and the first encounter I had with him this year. One of the major mistakes I felt that I made that time is that I was messing around with the camera, trying to get the camera on him, and I didn't have time to do that and properly get my bow ready and everything, because that whole encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds or 15, around 20 seconds, something like that. From the time I saw him, he was there at like 20 yards right away. Well, this time I saw him 100 yards out or more, and so I had lots and lots of time, and I got that camera on him. And I had decided, after our conversation, after I'd been thinking through all the different things I wanted to do differently, my plan was that if I had another shot opportunity at a deer that was fast, like I saw a deer and I was not going to have very much time, I had to move fast, I was just going to say, forget the camera, I'm going to focus on the shot. If an opportunity came up where I had lots of time, then I might get the camera out, try to get a little bit of film of him, and if possible, if I can do it, smartly, I'll have the camera rolling. But I'm not going to sacrifice a good shot opportunity because of it. So that's where things stood with this whole deal. So like I said, I had the camera on him, zoomed in on him, got a good look at him, and right away I was like, oh my gosh, it's him. And I went through the checkpoint, through the different checks. I went, okay, he's got the shorter G2s and G3s, check. He's got a taller right brow tine than his left brow tine, check. He's got the crab claw G4s, check, check, and check. I mean, everything was in line, and I was like, I cannot believe it. Like, just yesterday we found out he's still alive, I think. Now, like, I've just been thinking about this deer all night, and holy crap, the first deer I see in the spot where I thought I would see him, boom, Jawbreaker's here at 100 yards, and he's coming in. It was just nuts. So he's coming in. He gets to the trail that I had actually walked in on, and he turns and goes left. I needed him to go right towards me. So I grabbed my grunt call. I let out one deep guttural grunt, kind of a growl almost, and he stopped, turned right towards me, and just stared for maybe 5-10 seconds, and then turned and started heading right towards me. At that point, I was like, holy crap, this is actually happening. Yeah, it was nuts. An interesting side note, last podcast we talked a little bit about some of the new gear we like, and one of the items you had mentioned was nose jammer. It's, the spray, it's like vanilla extract spray that you put on there that sort of confuses the deer's nose and senses. Well, after we had talked, like we said, like I mentioned, a number of other people had mentioned this product to me over the past couple of weeks and months. And so when you told me that you were using nose jammer and that you liked it, that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, I got to get this. So literally that night, I think it was that night or the next night, Dan, after we talked, I went to the store and I picked up a couple cans of nose jammer. And so that morning was the first time I'd ever used nose jammer. And that buck walked right up my trail, all the way to me, and never Never was worried about scent. So right there, that's a pretty glowing endorsement, or at least convincing example for me to see of it working pretty well. Yeah. So I'm glad I tried it. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't use it that day. But he comes down that trail right towards me, and eventually he gets about right in front of me, about 25 yards away. But there's really tall, like I said, really tall grass and some saplings and bushes and stuff. And there's no shot opportunities because his chest isn't open, but he's close, and he gets like right in front of me. And at this point, he looks up in my general direction and sees my silhouette or shape. Again, I wasn't really well concealed because of the lack of cover up there. So he locks onto me, and in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, Jawbreaker's at 30 yards, and you're going to blow it because you're in a crappy tree. And I was just like, oh man, I can't believe this happened. I'm just frozen there. And he just stares up in my general direction for a long time, but he couldn't make sense of it. He knew there was something there because there was this big blob, but he just couldn't figure out what it was. And so in my head, I'm thinking, okay, if somehow he happens to not bust me, next time he puts his head down in this tall stuff, I have to draw because I don't think I'm going to have another opportunity to do it. So unbelievably, he puts his head back down, slowly takes another couple steps, and so I draw back my bow and get locked in. And as this is all happening, I'm thinking through all the things, that happened last time with him. The mistakes I made, the things I want to do differently. So I'm running through these things in my head. Take it slow. Focus on settling that pin in there. Make sure your peep sight's right. Last time my peep sight didn't open properly. So all these things are going on in my head, and I get drawn back. He gets back on me, starts looking at me again, and we ended up timing it because I've got film of this whole thing. I was at full draw for almost 2 minutes. This deer was just staring me down, and I'm at full draw. And after like a minute, minute 15 of holding at full draw, just waiting, just staring at him. He's staring at me. I'm staring at him. I'm at full draw. My back's starting to hurt. My arms are starting to shake. All of a sudden, my legs just go completely out of control. I've just been standing there normal, holding back my bow, and then I don't even know how to describe it, but just they went AWOL. Like, at like car dealerships, they have those blow up, like tall, skinny, like Gumby looking things that are like waving in the wind. Those are my legs.
You got a case of the crazy legs is what happened.
That is exactly what I got. And it was so crazy that when it was happening, I really swear to God, I saw that buck's eyes squint and his head kind of tilt and look at me like, what the heck is up there? Like, what is shaking? And I'm thinking in my head, I am not going to lose this shot of redemption because my stupid freaking legs can't stop shaking. And I just remember thinking that in my head, and then like just every ounce of my strength I used to just tense up my entire body. Like I squeezed my fists, my chest, my arms, my legs, my knees, my feet, everything. I just tried to clench it all as tight as I possibly could to try to stop that shaking. And somehow I did. And the buck's still looking at me. So finally I calmed the shaking down. He takes another step. And now he's just like a step or so outside of my opening in this grass that I can get a shot at. And just the front of his like brisket and neck is out in the open. So I just remember settling that pin in just in front of his neck and just sitting there waiting and was ready. And I just needed him to take, give me one more step. And I'm going to sink it right in there. And, I waited and I waited. And finally put his head down, nosed around a little bit, and I was like, please let this happen. And then he took another step and sunk that pin in right behind the shoulder, took another extra second, touched it off, and I watched that fletching go right behind the shoulder, right through the lungs, double lunged him, and he took off running, mule kicked, and then I just, proceeded to melt down. It was nuts. I couldn't believe I just got a shot at him again, and all this had happened, and it was just crazy. I was just really unbelievably happy. And so to make a long story short, after that I called my buddies I was out there hunting with, told them what happened. We decided to back out, meet up, watch the footage, and then go make a game plan. So that's what we did. I got the arrow, decent blood in the arrow, but not a whole lot, but it had gone through a bunch of grass and weeds and stuff, after it passed through him. And so I think some of that wiped off the blood and whatnot. And then as I was walking out, a big kind of squall came through. So I was kind of worried that I might get some blood washed away because there was a bunch of rain. But we went, watched the footage. The shot looked great. And, me, my friends, Josh and Corey, we all agreed, yep, that's Jawbreaker. And so we decided to wait about, it'd been, I think, about 2 hours after the shot. And we decided to go in for it. So we went in, picked up the blood, had really good blood. And we just followed it out through the CRP, and then it went to the edge of the cornfield, and it followed the edge of this cornfield for probably 100, 150 yards, 200 yards, and then he turned into the cornfield, just like Jawbreaker had done the first time that I hit this buck in October. We start going through this corn, and blood starts getting a little sketchy, and now I'm starting to get nervous. And now we're at, it's been 300 yards I've been tracking him, and I'm thinking, how in the world has this buck gone so far with that shot? And now we're at 400 yards. And now I'm getting really nervous. Blood's getting sketchy. We get all the way to the other side of the field, and now we're at the property border. And I'm back down to the low point where I'm like, how could this happen? I've just hit the same buck twice, and I'm not going to find him again. I was just, I was starting to get worried. And then just as that was happening, I looked down the edge of the cornfield, in the little gap between the fence row and the corn, and I just saw this main beam laying on its side. And it was just crazy. There it was.
What time of day did you shoot him?
Shot him at 8:30 a.m. And
Gotcha.
I don't think it was till noon maybe that we found him, or I guess I don't even know what time it was, but sometime in the afternoon.
Yeah.
But there was all as you know, Dan, and some of our listeners know, there was one more kind of twist in the story, because I ran over there. I couldn't believe it. This buck that I'd been so upset by wounding him, and now I found he's alive, and now I get a shot at him, and then I think I'm not going to find him, and now I just found him. It's been a 2-year hunt for this buck. Got all these pictures and all this history and all this stuff that happened. Now I killed him, I found him, and it was just this crazy wave of emotion that crashed over me. And I run over there to the buck, and I put my hands on his antlers, and I'm looking at him, and then just weird kind of realization passed through my head as I'm looking at him. I look at his antlers. He's a stud, big buck. I start looking at his body, and I start looking for the wound from when I hit him the first time. I wanted to see where to hit him, and I don't see anything. And I grab his antlers, and I kind of twist his head around. I'm looking, and I just kind of stood up and put my hand on my head, and I looked over at my buddy. I'm like, this isn't Jawbreaker. It was not Jawbreaker. We were all so dead set sure it was him. I thought for sure it was him, and it wasn't. This is a totally different buck, and I mean, it really threw me off there. He's an awesome buck, mature buck, cool deer, but in the moment I was kind of really disappointed because I had been so determined to get Jawbreaker to kind of close out that whole thing, and I didn't. And so for a second there, I was kind of disappointed and upset by it, just a touch. But then I kind of realized, this is an incredible blessing, an incredible deer, an awesome hunt, and so you can't be disappointed by that. So long story short, I'm stoked to have gotten this deer. Awesome hunt, huge, just a great kind of monkey off my back, getting that deer for the year. It feels great, especially, after having the poor shot on Jawbreaker early in the year to send an arrow right through the lungs this time to really, get a good one. It felt great. And, it's awesome. I'm stoked about it. It was cool. I went back, and it's funny, we went and looked back at the trail camera picture. We compared trail camera pictures of Jawbreaker to this deer, like the same kind of look. And, I mean, they are just so similar. Like, it's like if you took Jawbreaker and took an inch off of every tine, maybe. I mean, all the other antler characteristics almost match up perfectly. It's just like this is like Jawbreaker a year or two younger, maybe.
And that's what I saw when I looked at the picture. I said, I don't know what the post was exactly about, but I'm like, oh, that's just Jawbreaker from the previous year. He didn't do too much. But then when I read the article, I saw that, oh my God, it's a different buck. So yeah, now that you've said it, I was kind of curious on what your reaction was.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, there's, looking back at it now, there's a couple things that, maybe you could tell the difference. But, in the moment with him coming in, I saw those three key characteristics. It was a big deer, and all those things lined up, and he passed the eyeball test. It was him. So,
yeah,
it was crazy how it all happened. But, as I guess an addendum to that, now I went through all this stuff, realized this deer wasn't Jawbreaker. So then that got me thinking, were those trail camera pictures that I got that I had seen the day before, were those actually Jawbreaker, or were those this deer? So I went back and looked at all those pictures, and me and my buddies have been studying them, and I don't know. There's a number of things that line up perfectly, like his tine length, his crab claw type G4s, his right brow tine is taller than his left brow tine, and there's just a slight crook in it. And that all looks perfect. But in these pictures I've got of this deer, his right G2 looks long, looks just as long as his G3. But on Jawbreaker, his G2 is shorter by an inch or two. And I don't know. I just can't figure it out, because part of me says, how do all these other things line up? His frame, his G4s, his brow tines, how do all those things look almost perfect, and this one thing not be it? How could that possibly be? Does every darn deer run around this property look exactly the same? So I don't know if it's a trick with a camera angle that maybe looks that G2 look too long, or maybe it just is a totally different deer that has remarkably similar characteristics. The only pictures I have, they're not great pictures. There's two pictures of him walking away, so I'm looking at him from the back, slightly quartering away, or quite quartering away. And then the one other picture, he's way in the background, and you can just see his right side, and then he's got some bushes in front of his left side. So I don't have perfect shots of him to tell 100% who this deer is, but I don't know. It's still a mystery to me.
Don't you have pictures of Jawbreaker on trail camera that are 100% sure it's him, with the wound onto the side?
No. The only pictures I have are these ones I'm talking about, and there were 6 or 7 days after my shot. He passed through one time in the middle of the night, and these photos do show what some people think might be the wound, but there's weeds there, and I just can't tell if it's weeds that you're seeing in the shadows or if it's actually a wound. But it's not obvious. It's not like absolutely that's him. It's geez, it really could be him, but at the same time, I just don't know. So that's where things are now. The story continues, and maybe Jawbreaker will be back for 2015.
You never know. You never know, Mark.
Yeah. So it was a roller coaster, just an absolute crazy roller coaster.
Right. We're experiencing. Well, we experienced the downs the day Ryan missed. We call the buck we call No Show Jones, but he showed back up again last night. Now we're kind of getting back on the up. Tonight we had some really cool encounters with with a buck I thought Ryan was going to shoot, but he ended up passing it. This 10-pointer that you look at this buck, and most people would have shot him, but because he's a 3-year-old, this buck in 1 or 2 more years will be absolutely giant. It's just one of those deer that has genetics written all over him, and he's going to be the next No Show Jones, if that makes any sense.
Man, so how big was he now?
What I think is probably in the 140 class as a 3-year-old.
Nice.
Perfect 10 with he's starting to get bladed on one of his G2s, and he's got about a 2-inch sticker sticking straight out of his right base. So he's pretty recognizable.
That sounds kind of like the buck I shot. My buck was 146-inch 10, but he had a sticker coming out of his right base, but instead of sticking straight up, it sticks straight down and actually touches his skull. And so you kind of can't see it unless you're looking at the top of his head. So in the pictures, you don't see it at all in the pictures, but it's kind of a cool little feature there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're the last couple of days we've been hunting. Last night, this morning, tonight, and tomorrow morning we're going to be hunting in the same stand that we've been sitting in the same stand, and it's going to be over top of a well-used 2-track that it's basically a travel corridor, and these bucks come through once every couple of days to scent check the bedding area. There's a bedding area near it, and there's a community scrape that every deer that comes through the area hits, and we're just waiting. We're 5 sticks up, so our wind kind of carries over the entire area. So we're not worried about getting busted. It's a patience game now.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Yeah. Well, it's that time of year where that patience can pay off if you give enough time.
Right. Tomorrow, the goal is to potentially sit all day long. We're going to pull a Mark Kenyon.
Hey.
And
all right.
I'm going to have to stock up on hand warmers.
Yeah.
And potentially take some toilet paper with me. So
the essentials.
I'm pretty regular, if you know what I mean.
I'm right there with you, buddy.
So who knows? Anything can happen. I really like Ryan to tag out tomorrow for 2 reasons. One, because he's been hunting hard this entire time. 2, because I want to hunt for a couple of days too.
Yeah,
so,
I believe it.
But yeah, man, I just love. I mean, it's become a grind. It's become work, but it's because it's a passion that we have. I don't know. It's actually less enjoyable than work, because work, you have running water and you have toilets and you have heat and you have. This is different, and it's really hard for us to explain. We're trying to explain it today in the car. It's like, why do people do this to themselves? You know, it's almost like they're setting themselves up for failure. But it's something that, just like you, man, and all the listeners, we enjoy doing it. We enjoy putting ourselves through the suffering because the reward is so great.
Yeah, it's 98%, a grind, and then you get that just unbelievable 2 or 1% of the time that just stays with you forever, and it's all worth it for those moments. Right.
And both Ryan and I have daughters, and we're talking about this the other day too, man. This is that is probably the hardest thing for me, is being away from the family. We're 2 days into the second week of our vacation, and the wives are starting to, they're past the acceptance stage. They're on to the I'm annoyed stage, and the next stage is fury. And and I don't know, man. It's just something we'll do, and they'll get over it, hopefully.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I was gone for 10 days, and after I tagged out on my buck, I was planning on staying a while and filming my buddy Josh. And my wife was like, "You're what? No, you're coming home." And so I convinced her to let me stay for a couple more days. So I was able to stay down there for a few. But I came home 3 days earlier than I was supposed to. So, you gotta compromise a little bit. And you and I both are very fortunate to have pretty understanding wives that let us do this kind of thing. So, now now I'm gonna chase bucks here in Michigan for a few days. So,
what do you got on camera? Anything?
Well, finally, I've got a shooter. He's not an Iowa shooter, but he's a really solid a solid 3.5-year-old 8-point here in Michigan. Just a heavy, nice 8-pointer. And he's actually, we might have mentioned it before. I think I've mentioned a couple times. I've got this one random 8-pointer that I kind of get some pictures of, but can never get a good look at him. I've been getting him on camera here and there, but like I said, never really get a good solid idea of what he is. And I saw him once just before dark, and I saw him in a food plot just like 500 yards away once. So he's been around, but I can never get a good eyeball on him. And now finally, I just pulled my cameras today, and he's like everywhere. I've got 5 daylight pictures of him. He's been on camera 5 different times during daylight in the last 10 days. He's been on 2 cameras 15 times. Great pictures. So all of a sudden he's on it. So I'm going in there tomorrow, going to hunt all day for the next 2.5 days and see if I can't make it happen.
Cool. What, as far as for the listeners are concerned, what kind of, are you seeing any chasing when you were down in Ohio or even up in Michigan? You seeing any chasing? You seeing any, what kind of movement are you seeing?
Yeah, glad you brought that up. Me personally, across Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio, I have not seen a single instance of chasing. Not one. I have not seen a single buck chase a doe. I've seen some cruising, but I've just seen it's been really, really slow. I mean, I got a shot at a buck. He was cruising, and we saw a couple other cruisers throughout the days afterwards and beforehand, but I mean, overall, just super slow movement for me. And like I said, no chasing. So I don't know what's going on. If it just happened to be some bad luck or in the wrong spots or wrong times, or but I've from a number of people I've heard similar things. So maybe across parts of the country it's still not really, really hopping. But I don't know. You've seen a little better, haven't you?
I tell you, the only chasing that we've seen is by immature bucks. I have not seen. I have. So that mature deer that Ryan missed, we have trail camera pictures of him, and you add that with the sightings. I don't think he's hooked up with a doe yet. And I don't think that the mature does. I don't know. The rut prediction said it was going to be early this year. I think, and this is just my opinion based on what I'm seeing from the tree stand, I don't know if the first does have come into heat yet. It doesn't seem like, there's that, it's to that point yet. But, and I hope it comes in the next couple of days because we really need it to happen. But it's like tonight we saw all 3 does. The previous day we saw nothing but bucks. So it's almost like the does know that they're getting ready to come into heat and they're trying to avoid any contact with the bucks. And they're bedded down all day long, except for right at last light and early in the morning. So I don't know. It's like I said, no mature bucks. I've seen chase, just like 1 and 2 year olds, and then other than that, just your cruising bucks. That's it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully by next week we'll have something different to tell, because right now it's a little disheartening a little bit, but it's the rut. Anything can happen any day now. So, fingers crossed, right? Right.
Now, only thing we need to do is try to kill 2 bucks, and let's see, Ryan is leaving after his hunt on Friday night. So, let's see, Wednesday, Thursday, so 3 days for him to kill, and I think I'm going to stick around Saturday. So 4 days. So 3 days to kill, 4 days to kill 2 bucks. I wonder if hopefully we can get it done. We need a Hail Mary here.
All right. Well, I'll have my fingers and toes crossed for you. I think there's a chance.
There's a chance. There's always a chance.
That's the truth. Well, it is now time for us to get Jared on the line here, Dan. So how about we reconvene next week to talk about our rut progress, and for now, let's start talking extreme rut hunting tactics with Jared Scheffler of Whitetail Adrenaline.
Perfect.
Let's get him on the line. All right, as we mentioned earlier, joining us today on the Wired to Hunt podcast is Jared Scheffler of Whitetail Adrenaline. Welcome to the show, Jared.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark and Dan.
Yeah, thanks for being here with us. We're
You bet.
You know, as we talked a little bit about before we started recording, I know that this time of year is crazy. It's crazy for me and Dan, so I'm sure it's crazy for you. So we know that taking this extra time to talk, it's a sacrifice. So thank you.
You bet, not a problem.
Yeah. Now, as we briefly talked about in the intro, you produce the Whitetail Adrenaline DVDs. But for those out there who might not be familiar with them, can you tell us a little bit about what Whitetail Adrenaline is and what makes you guys so unique?
There's a few different elements behind our production and our philosophy, I guess. The first and probably the most that people know about, or I guess what people know about us, is the public land aspect. We produce all public land whitetail hunting videos, and that classifies any land that's legally open for anybody else to hunt. So any type of government program lands, anything that anybody else can legally hunt. So all of our content outside of our first video, that's the only one that's it's a partial. It's some public, some by permission.
Okay.
So we've done 6 straight. This will be, I think, the 7th straight season of. It's a blur for me right now, but it's like 6 or 7 straight seasons of public land. Outside of that, we've always been a sponsor-free company, where we just try and incorporate just regular guys going out hunting and capture their hunt, so to speak. So that's another aspect of it. One of the later aspects that has come over the past few years is we do all of our hunting exclusively on the ground, in a very aggressive sort of fashion. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. But that's another unique aspect of our videos.
Yeah.
And then I'd say that's probably the core elements. We also capture everything all on the fly. It's unscripted. It's really got that raw, authentic feel. We don't go back and refilm stuff. So I think that's another thing that kind of comes through. So
Yeah, definitely. I'd say those are the things that have drawn me to your guys' videos too. I think I first heard about you guys just from being at different trade shows and stuff, and seeing your booth and whatnot, and then eventually had seen you enough times around. I was like, I need to just see these guys. And I think I saw one of the trailers for your video maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago or something back then. And I watched it. And I just thought to myself, these guys are crazy. and then ever since then, I've watched all your DVDs, and I still think you're crazy, but I love it.
It's well, and a lot of that that craziness comes from hunting on the ground. And when you're hunting public land and you have that amount of acreage, you can afford to take those risks. And I feel like you almost have to take those risks in order to get the type of results that we do. Whereas if you would hunt like that on a smaller acreage, say a 40 or an 80, outside of this time of the year, you can get away with it a little bit, but you're going to probably blow your area right out. So it works out really well, that style that we incorporate on a public land aspect. Although back when I did hunt private land, I hunted on the ground quite a bit. Probably not at the aggressiveness level that I do now, but I never felt like I really blew out the area back then either. But I think I had a couple hundred acres there I was dealing with, and I wasn't doing it every day, and so yeah. Yeah,
well, it makes for some really exciting hunts and video. I mean, it's just me and my buddies, we just get an absolute kick out of watching you guys because it's just so different from anything else out there, and it's just crazy intense, and the encounters you have are just unbelievable. I still can't get over some of the stuff I've seen you guys. I can't imagine, what you've actually lived through. Some of those encounters just look unreal. So I'm curious though, Jared, this just kind of popped in my head, but I've always wondered, when it comes to like 99.9% of, big whitetail hunters out there, we're all hunting from tree stands. That's just kind of the norm that everyone talks about, that you see written about. How did you get started on the ground? Why and how did this become your preferred way to hunt whitetails?
Well, Mark, it actually goes back to when first time I can remember I was 16 years old. And, I was in high school, and, daylight savings changed and everything, and I only had about 45 minutes to an hour before I had to be at school, right? And I wanted to hunt in the worst way, but there wasn't enough time in most of those situations to get out to the tree, and then you'd be sitting there for maybe a half hour, 45 minutes, and then you got to climb back down. And I had some wide open area that was a lot closer to the high school where I went, and I was I was kind of sort of making my way towards school one day, and I saw this big buck out in this wide open grass. The only thing out there was these giant power poles. And I went out on foot, and I didn't get him, but I got to within about 80 yards, and that really kind of, I guess that's the first time I can remember hunting on the ground. And then, of course, later that day, I got my mom to call in that I had a doctor's appointment or something. I can't remember the details. And I did go out and I hung a tree stand in one of those power poles, wide open, just a power, just electrical power poles out there. And I saw there had been two big bucks out there, and I saw another one, and he wasn't making his way towards me. And finally, I just had enough of it, and I was running out of light. Probably had a half hour of light left, and he was 400 yards away. So I just climbed down and started making my way towards him, and pretty soon he was coming towards me. And all of a sudden, he was at 17 yards, and like a 16-year-old kid, he stopped, and I was drawn, and there was like two blades of grass between him and I was thinking, well, he'll surely take another step. And little did I know that the two blades of grass probably wasn't going to deflect that arrow any, not with a fixed blade head anyway, which I was shooting. And, of course, he never took that step. He looked right at me and decided to go the other way. So that really was the first instance where I hunted that I can remember hunting on the ground. And then I periodically did that along with taking 10-pound tree stands in the dark in the morning, hanging them, pulling them back down, or at night over the years. And then, I did that, but I still hunted on the ground. And then it was in 2010, we had filmed 3 videos, and it seemed like every time we got a little bit more aggressive hunting on the ground, we got more results. And then I did just flashed in my head. I'm like, well, most of the bucks I've shot, I've done it on the ground, and I've hunted much less on the ground than I have out of a tree stand set. And I liked the aspect of the camera at eye level with the deer, and I thought that was unique. And it also just, when you're at eye level with a deer, a big buck on the ground level, I mean, you're in that same world as he is. I mean, it's like you can almost feel him breathing. I mean, he's right there. And there's just something it's very exhilarating, I guess you could say. So we decided, let's take one season and just hunt exclusively on the ground and see how it goes. And our encounter rate went through the roof on big bucks. However, with that comes there's a learning curve to it. The hardest part, I think, about hunting whitetails on the ground typically is pulling off the shot. And when I say hunting on the ground, I mean like when you're going after them or sneaking in on them or something like that. Especially with 2 guys out there, a lot of times they do know that you're there. By the time you're about to take that shot, and you can get caught up in rushing a shot or forgetting, hey, this deer's probably going to duck 10 inches or things like that. So there's definitely been our encounter rate has been a lot higher since we've hunted on the ground, but the blown shots or messing up the shots has definitely also increased at a higher percentage as well. But like anything, I think the more you do it, the better you're gonna lessen that, I guess you could say. So,
are these bucks, when you start your stock on them, are they bedded or are they standing?
I prefer to have them bedded, but they're not always bedded. I prefer to have them bedded just because obviously I've got a little bit more time typically, and I can pick my route, and I don't have to worry about the wind. I can manipulate the wind direction a lot easier because I have the time to get in position how I want to work towards him or whatnot. But sometimes we've got a buck that's cruising or whatever. And, yesterday, for instance, we were in Iowa and we had a big one, probably a mid-160s buck. And we actually bumped this deer. We bumped a 140-inch 8-pointer checking out this piece. And he went running off, and about 30, and I'm thinking, oh, man, I just blew that one. And I'm thinking, okay, how is he going to loop back onto the public? Can we give him about an hour and slowly creep into where we think he went and maybe spot him again? And all of a sudden I hear this trotting. And I look, and here's this mid-160s buck trotting. And I don't know if he saw us or picked up a little scent or what, but then he stops in the brush a little bit, maybe 120 yards out. And he stood there for about 10 minutes. I actually thought he was going to lay down. But the wind blew towards him a couple times. It was really swirling in there, and I think he picked up a little more and just moseyed out. Well, we did a big loop, and we were only about maybe 5-10 minutes behind getting ahead of where he ended up. He came out about 80 yards through the woods and beat us to where we thought we could cut him off. So, we prefer to have them bedded, but if they're cruising or whatnot, we'll make an attempt. Very rarely do we not get aggressive with them. Our mentality is they're there right now today. Let's go for it. Because a lot of times we don't have all season to play with them. And the next day, squirrel hunters could be in there hunting, or another bow hunter could move in, or anything could happen on a public land aspect that could completely, you'd never see that deer again the rest of the season. So we've just found a lot better results trying to go after them. And if we blow it, we just get aggressive and move on to the next spot or the next, trying to find the next deer. That's kind of our mentality on it.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique way of hunting, especially in Wisconsin when everybody, you think Midwestern states, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, you think tree stands. But as far as this year is going, how is your rut going so far this season? What states have you been hunting? For the rut here, I've targeted Wisconsin, Iowa, and then we just got to Kansas today. Should have probably never left Iowa, but our plan is to hopefully do well here in Kansas and then get back to Iowa for a few days. So that's kind of our tentative plan. But what are you seeing for movement?
Probably the best road activity I've ever seen.
Really?
This year. Yeah, actually, 2 weeks today, there's only been one day where we didn't see shooters.
Wow.
Yeah, I've never had a streak like that. However, I've also never had a streak where we've seen so many shooters and not gotten shots. Everything just seems like there's been multiple shooters that have been close enough to get shots, but just either too many sticks or couldn't get them to stop, or, we had one that laid down 30 yards away that came through and we just couldn't get a shot, and also he laid down, and there was a big one that actually there's two of them that came in, and this one laid down 30 yards away, and we could not get him. All we needed him to do was move 2 steps, and we couldn't get him up on his feet, and finally got too dark, and that was it. We've had multiple situations. I did blow a shot a week ago in Wisconsin. I rattled one in, and I shot a little low on him, and I hit probably 2 feet under him,
Ooh.
It was. I mean, I'm hunting with a longbow, but I shouldn't hit that well. I don't know what happened, but.
What part of Iowa are you hunting in?
That's the $1 million question, Dan. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. I don't disclose areas where I hunt for obvious reasons.
That's fair.
North, south, east, west.
What's that?
North, south, east, west. I'm not looking for a town.
I usually tell people Hawaii.
Their whitetail population's booming.
What's that?
Their whitetail population's booming.
Oh yeah, it's excellent. Over-the-counter tags, cheap flights, everything. No, I mean, as far as where I've hunted Iowa, I've hunted western, south, northeast, north central, and then kind of central too. And they're all good. I would rank the southern part of Iowa as probably being the best, and then central as being the next best. That's about all I want to disclose. I started a rule a few years back because it got a little bit out of hand. And I started a rule that if you're not on the trip, you don't get to find out.
Yeah, that's something. That's something.
It just keeps everything simpler.
Yep.
So
yep. I totally understand that. So you said you've seen more shooters than you've seen maybe ever, or at least recently. How many different encounters do you think you've had so far this year with shooter bucks?
In those 15 days, I guess counting today, actual encounters has probably been about 20. about 20. And I guess, like yesterday, for instance, there was 3 of them that we had. Yesterday was the best day I've had in a wooded environment for hunting. We saw 3 bucks that were in the 160 to 175 range.
Jeez.
Now, in a wooded environment, one of those in a day is probably the most I've ever had that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know what was going on. It was crazy. Furthermore, I have no idea how we couldn't close a deal on one of them. The cards just haven't been in our favor lately as far as that goes. It's been a little nerve-wracking, I guess. But usually, I mean, we get 2-3 encounters. We're gonna get a deer. That's usually how it goes. But not lately.
Yeah. So that's a perfect segue then, I think, into the main thing we want to talk about today. As I mentioned, wanted to focus our conversation on extreme, aggressive rut hunting tactics. And so this falls right in your wheelhouse, Jared, given what you've already talked about and how we know you hunt. So maybe to kick things off on this front, can you maybe give us a high-level idea of what your basic tactics or strategies are for hunting the rut this time of year? What are you basically doing? And then from there, we'll dive into some, specifics.
Sure. Okay. In the wooded environments, my tactic typically is we'll go into a piece. Let's say it's a brand new piece we've never been to. And a lot of times that's the case. We're going into brand new acreage we've never been to. And we'll move through it at a fairly good clip until we find good sign, whether it's got to be fresh looking sign to where we're going to put the brakes on and slow our pace down. So, because what we want to do is the first thing is you've got a lot of public land, and we need to find out where today's hunt spot is. What they were doing last week or whatever doesn't really pertain. It's not something that we're interested in. We need to make it happen right now, today. So we're looking for really fresh sign, in places that are really happening. And so many times what we'll do is we'll go into the woods and we'll start at a walking pace. And once we come across something that we feel like we need to put the brakes on and slow it down and start glassing through the woods, we'll do that. Whether that takes bumping a deer, bumping a doe or two, and I've had this happen where I bump a doe or two and they run off and they're just about out of sight and they kind of put on the brakes and you start glassing the woods. And 10, 15 minutes later, all of a sudden a buck shows up. I've even had them where the does start blowing, but they don't completely leave the area. They just keep blowing. And I've had shooter bucks show up. Like, they're almost annoyed by the blowing, but by them does blowing, it tells them, it lets a buck know across the ridge, hey, there's does over there. And they're blowing at stuff all the time. Now, if a deer blows and leaves the entire area, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
But I don't really get wound up in the last few years when a doe starts blowing until she completely leaves the area. I see it about every year where we bump a doe or something and she'll sit there and blow and blow and blow. And almost every year that I can remember for the last 3 years that I've just put on the brakes, I've had a shooter show up at some point within 10, 15 minutes.
Jeez.
So I don't worry too much about bumping deer. A lot of times public land deer are used to being bumped too. So that I think their tolerance level is a little bit higher. But, once we get into a spot that's hot, like I said, we'll put on the brakes, we'll start class. And sometimes we will set up on a spot. I mean, we'll set up on the ground. We found a spot in Wisconsin this year that I think it was every day we went in there, we had a shooter in rain. We couldn't pull it together. That's the spot where I missed one. That was a spot that we didn't really, we still hunted through it to find it, but then, we realized right away, hey, this is a pinch point location, and I actually rattled in a couple of different shooters there, but only the one made it into the lane. So that's a little bit about the wooded environment. I mean, if we're going through the woods and we catch one, a lot of times we'll be glassing these like ridge points, in these hilly areas. These bucks, they love to be on the ends of these ridge points. They love to sit up there. They can watch both sides a lot of times, or 10, 20 yards across, and they can look down the valley. And so we'll be at the bottom of the valley glassing up on those ridge points. Yesterday, in fact, one of the really big ones that we spotted, it was doing just that. It was up on top of the ridge, but we didn't get there in time. But that's kind of a little bit about it. In your more open woods, basically, we have to be moving at a slow enough pace that deer can't hear us. And if that kind of makes sense, if they can hear us coming before we can see them, they're already looking for us. Like, what is that over there? If that kind of makes sense. And if any deer that, is looking for you is going to see you first. And so, if that kind of makes sense, it's something that once you start doing it, you kind of figure out what you can get away with, what you can't, how to walk, how to sound like a deer, kind of, or something that's not a human. Humans typically they walk at a pretty steady, even pace, and so you just kind of learn some of those techniques as you go. Since we've started producing these videos this season, especially, I've seen it where people have messaged me a lot that, hey, I tried hunting on the ground this year. I shot the biggest buck I've ever shot, or I shot this big one. I can't, 6 yards he came in, or, I mean, they're just blown away. Like, I never thought you could hunt on the ground like this. I believe it's something that most people can do very effectively, more effectively than they probably think. And I mean, I think it was yesterday, I got another one that came in. I got shot at 6 yards. Came in, yeah. And I got one 2 days before that from another guy, similar situation. I can't remember. It was inside of 10 steps that he shot that one at. But and one other thing I do want to mention is over the past few years, we've taken on the ground level, we've taken head-on shots on deer, and traditionally, it was actually an accident the first time it happened to me. I bumped my trigger release when I had one facing me, and I had the pin right there. Well, it got me thinking, like, you know, at head-on level, I mean, you're driving the arrow right home. And those are the quickest kills I've ever seen in my life. In fact, one of the guys from the other day said the same thing, and it was about a 10, 12-second deal. I think that's a very common shot that happens on the ground, or a very common angle. A lot of times it seems like those deer, if they do spot you and they give you a few seconds, a lot of times they do square up with you, or they just, for whatever reason, they're coming directly at you. That happens a lot. That's actually become our favorite shot angle. Broadside has actually been one of our least effective. And I've thought about it a lot. A head-on shot, there's no, you don't have to worry about if they're going to take a step forward, or even if they start to turn, you still got a 1/4-2 shot, which with a good broadhead isn't, you know, typically an issue. And also, if they duck, a lot of times they duck the front of their bodies a lot more than their rear, from what I've seen. And so even if you kind of hit them high, like my buddy Shay here in the videos, he hit a deer high last year that was head on. It looked high, but it actually came out, and that was with the G5 Montec head fixed blade. It actually came out right between the back legs on the bottom side. So
wow.
If that kind of makes sense, from what I've seen, their bottom drops a lot more. So you've got quite a bit of surface area and a lot of veins, and you're taking out a lot of vitals on that angle. So I'm not going to suggest necessarily taking it, but it has become our favorite shot angle on the ground. That is.
That's interesting. So
yeah.
So you mentioned, you know, a lot of these tactics that you're using in the wooded environments. Now, are you doing anything drastically different when you're in the wide open, maybe prairie type environment like Kansas or something like that?
Yes. In the wide open areas, typically we'll do one of two things. We'll get to an elevated position, whether that's a big hill or somewhere where we can get up high and glass a lot of area. And we're going to try and get a bead on one, whether we spot him already laying down or spot him in the morning going to lay down somewhere. And we'll try and, you know, just spot him laying down and then plan our attack from there. That's typically our tactic for the open areas. Last year, we got pretty effective with a homemade decoy that we built, where we'll find these big ones that are locked down with does, and then we'll take this decoy in towards them. And you know, and we found the best results is to try and sneak in as close as you can without them ever knowing or seeing the decoy, and then get it into position, and then try and get that buck to come over to run you off, which from behind that decoy can get it's dangerous for one, but our philosophy is so is rock climbing and a lot of other things that you could do. So we're willing to accept that and take those risks, and we could get injured, or something that very bad could go wrong. I mean, you're dealing with a mature animal that is in a fight mode. It's not safe, but it sure is a rush, and it can be effective.
Yeah, the footage I've seen of you guys doing that so far is just incredible. I mean, that's nuts. So I'm curious. Yeah. I'm curious two things. Number one, I'd like to hear if you have had any close calls where you thought you might, come away with a skewed rib or something like that. But then number two, would love to hear details about, how you're going about with the decoying setup. How you're thinking about the wind, how you approach, when do you do it. I'd love some details on that too.
Sure. We haven't had anything super close happen as far as like one that actually, attacked us. The closest probably was one that I shot last year at just inside of 7 steps. He was marching in, and if I would have let him, he would have charged. And he would have charged the decoy, which I was directly behind it, and who knows what would have happened. We do think that at some point, even if we do get an arrow in one, he probably will just commit and keep coming. So I'm not sure what's going to happen from that point forward, but it's very likely that that'll happen at some point. And then when I was filming Shay last year on this really big buck, I thought that I was going to have to make a 911 call any minute, but that never happened. So we'll see. I might have more reports within the next week.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna have to keep an eye out on your Facebook page.
Yeah. So, but yeah, as far as you mentioned a little bit about our tactic once we have one spotted.
Yeah.
In these wide open areas, a lot of times they like to cover miles, even if they got a tail with them in the morning. We've watched them go for 5-6 miles at a crack in these wide open areas. It's been pretty surprising. I mean, I would have never thought that a deer would cover that amount of terrain, but they will. And when they're with a doe like that, obviously, we're going to wait for them to settle down. And hopefully this happens a lot of times where we're dealing with 160 acres of public here, and then maybe 300 acres of private here, and then, maybe a full square of public over here. And sometimes they land on public and sometimes they land on private, and so you don't always get to play with them. Sometimes you might end up watching them for an hour before all of a sudden they decide they're going to lay down on private and there's nothing you can do. So that happens sometimes as well. But once we have them spotted, we plan our attack. Once we have them spotted and we figure they're going to stay there for a little while, enough time for us to get in. What we do from that point is obviously, where's the wind blowing from? How can we get in on them? Using the wind to our best advantage. And then also, what's going to be the best route to sneak in undetected as close as we possibly can. And then also, obviously we're factoring in how they're laying, which direction they're looking, all those kinds of things. On windy days, that decoy it doesn't really work because it gets blown all over. So we have to resort to, a lot of times crawling on our hands and knees, which is fun too. We had a really close call last year on a big 9-pointer. And this one day we didn't know exactly where he was, but we knew he was somewhere in these weeds, and we were 5 steps from him before we realized it, and it was too late. So we were right on top of him, but it doesn't always work to use that decoy, and not always is the decoy the best option. It just depends on the situation. But that's kind of our approach in those wide open areas. That during the rut is to just spot them and plan your attack. What we have found is if they're on the move, even if they're going across a square mile, by the time you get around to the other side of the square with the vehicle and to try and find a spot to get in position, they're already through it. That's how much ground it does not take them 5 minutes hardly to cover a square mile. Wow. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. We have not yet once been able to get one square ahead of them before they're already there, basically. And I mean, trying to get 2 squares ahead of them, you lose sight of them, and then they decide, okay, they decide to cut south, and then all of a sudden you don't have a visual on them. So, in these wide open areas, a lot of times we will just stay in the vehicle, maybe 3/4 of a mile away, watching them, tailing them, trying to figure out where they're going and keeping an eye on them. Because once you lose visual, you're probably going to lose them the rest of the day. So
yeah, so whether it be in wooded environments or open areas like that, are you hunting drastically different during the rut than you would if you were, employing the same type of on-the-ground spot and stalk methods, let's say in early October? Or is it basically, the same thing? You're walking and looking for sign and then slowing down, or you're glassing, spotting, and moving in? Is it different or the same all year?
Early October, this year was the first year where I didn't really hunt on early October at all in Wisconsin, where I normally would, because we tried a out-of-state trip. But typically what I do during the early October is I'll go into a new piece every time I go out. And I don't really, it's more of a scouting session. I'm hunting, and I'm probably walking or still hunting, going at a walking pace or a slow walk pace, or sometimes I might walk a few steps and take a couple minutes. But basically my mission for that day, usually in early October, is to decide what places I want to key in on late October. That's kind of my mission, is to find a few places that are holding, some does, where I can, creep in there during late October and try and glass a buck, that's in and around that doe bedding area, or even set up near that doe bedding area. So that's kind of my approach in early October. I don't really go out with the focus of I'm going to try and fill my tag today. My mentality is trying to find the places that we want to zone in on more late October, early November.
Okay. Now, something you mentioned there might tie into this, but when you're heading into these areas, then let's say this time of year, are you keying in on specific things like a doe bedding area, like you mentioned there, or you mentioned earlier that you found a pinch point and you set up there? When you start your walks, are those things you're specifically looking for? And if you find it, you then focus your time there? Or are there any other spots like that?
Yeah, not, in early October, I won't target like say a doe bedding area or anything. I'm basically, let's say I walk into a place and I jump, say 4 or 5 does or something, it's not the right time of the year for me to zone in on that. But I know that late October, that's where I'm going to want to be. Late October in Wisconsin, early November, that's where I'm going to want to be. Not maybe so much on the rubs or the scrapes. I mean, we'll still find fresh scrapes in late October, early November, but that isn't really where the big bucks are keying in most of their, they're not so much concerned with those. They might be happen to be in a pinch point, those rubs and scrapes, which might not be a bad location. If there's, a bedding area somewhere on each side of it, they might be using that pinch point. And so we might naturally be set up there. Not so much because of the rubs and the scrapes, but because we know because of the rubs and scrapes that they frequent through there. So we know they're going to be using it to get from this building to that building area. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And so it kind of sounds like, during the rut, you are basically keying in on the same areas that, everybody hunting a tree stand's keying in on, right? You're looking for doe bedding areas and pinch points and whatnot. You're just finding those spots and then moving through them until you find more activity versus picking a specific spot there and waiting. Right.
And I mean, like I said, public land deer, a lot of times they're more tolerant. So you can bump these, 4 or 5 does or whatever's in there out in early October, and pretty safe bet you're not going to mess anything up for late October, as far as, that goes, because they're used to getting bumped occasionally. So I'm not so worried about that. But, I'm keying in on those same types of places where you would with a tree stand. I'm just, in late October, early November, we might go into a woods and we might still hunt through some of those areas. And we might set up shop, depending on, that's where there's a sense of feel that happens every time we go out, if that kind of makes sense. Like yesterday, it just felt hot, but today we go into that spot or whatever, and maybe it just doesn't have that same feel to it, whether it's the activity or something, it doesn't have that same feel. we might bust out of there and go to another spot. We're not waiting for a spot to get hot, if that kind of makes sense. And we might come back in a couple of days. But I don't know. That's it's really hard to. I think the more you do it, the more you just kind of gain that sense of feel for when it's time to pack up shop and go to another spot, whether that's for the day or the rest of the season. You're going to scratch it off the list. I think knowing when to pull the plug on a spot is very key, you know.
Yeah, I think that's something that people struggle with, whether they be in a situation like yours or even just, you know, hunting tree stands. The same thing goes. You know, when's the spot cold and you need to move on to somewhere else? It's a tough call to make.
Right. And I mean, when we find a hot spot, we'll milk it for everything it's worth. You know, we'll go in there continually. Like this one spot we found this year in Wisconsin, I think it was 5 or 6 days in a row that we hunted it. We had shooters come through every day. And we just kept, and they were different bucks. And we just kept milking it while it was hot. Because a lot of times, there's not a lot of spots that stay hot all season long. You know, they go in spurts. And so when they are hot like that, you know, we just get in there and like I said, milk it till it's dry. And as soon as we sense it's going dry, we're on to the next piece. We call it not getting emotionally attached to spots.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do, especially the more time a person invests in a spot. It's very easy to get comfortable. I mean, we as humans, we develop, you know, habits. You know, you go into a restaurant one time, and if you seat yourself, chances are if you go back again, you'll seat yourself in the same spot. So it's very easy to get comfortable with going back to that same spot. And we try and always keep that in our, you know, conscious mind. Like, are we getting locked down to this spot? I mean, if it's really, truly hot, it's worth being locked down. But we're always very aware of when to pull that plug, and are we getting emotionally attached to this spot that's going dry, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's so applicable too to guys hunting from stands, right? There's so many people that have their favorite tree stand and they go back to it time and time again. And it's like you said, you get attached to it. It becomes comfortable. It's easy. And lots of times that's you're missing out on some real action elsewhere. So
right, and you bring up a good point. That's another thing with hunting on the ground. It's very easy for us to, you know, get in and out of places and move on to the next spot. Whereas, like you were mentioning, you know, if you've got a tree stand set, it's very easy to, you know, it's not a lot of work to go back into that spot. But let's say that's your only tree stand set, and you got to think about pulling that tree stand down and relocating it or whatever. There's a little bit more work and effort involved in that. And it's really easy when you hunt on the ground to just go into a spot and pull out. There's less investment as far as that goes, if that kind of makes sense.
Oh yeah, I've definitely battled with that question myself. Do I want to deal with pulling this whole tree stand down and moving 100 yards and putting the whole dang thing back up again?
Right.
Those times I wish I was on the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, you'd be surprised at what a person can get away with on the ground. You know, I mean, that's primarily how they hunted 40 years ago, and they didn't do it with the bows we have today, or the camouflage that we have today.
Yeah.
You know, and I think hunting on the ground is a very effective. In fact, I think it's probably the best skill that we've developed on our end, and not that we've fully developed it, but you know, we're continually learning and seeing where we've done things wrong. But it's if we went away from that, our opportunity and counter rate would go way downhill, I think.
So I want to ask you about a situation that I think a lot of our listeners probably will encounter. And so, you know, the vast majority of other hunters are hunting from tree stands. But there is a situation where lots of times hunters are placed in a situation where they might consider going down on the ground. And that's when they're hunting during the rut. Let's say I'm sitting up in my tree stand tomorrow. It's about 10:30 in the morning, and I see a buck and a doe walk out into maybe some tall grass or some bedding cover, and I see that doe bed down, and then the buck beds down next to her. Maybe it's a little bit windy that day, and now I'm sitting here thinking, should I try to stalk in on that buck bedded with the doe? I've seen people do this before. I've seen people talk about doing this before, but I've also heard people talk about too risky or too many things that can go wrong. So my question for you, Jared, is if I'm sitting there and I see this buck bedded with a doe, can you walk us through how you would make the decision on, when is it a good time to move in on a deer like that? When is it a good time to hold back? And then, how are you going about making that move? In this case, where I'm up in the stand and I need to decide, should I go? How should I do it?
Sure. First thing that I would evaluate is where I think they're going to go next after they get up, because that's probably going to determine a lot of how I would move in on that animal. Depending if the wind's going to work for me in that situation too. And a lot of times we'll do what we call cheat the wind, where let's say you've got a pretty continuous, the wind's blowing in a pretty straight line where it's not swirling really, it's not swaying a whole lot, it's blowing north pretty much the same direction all the time. But you've got a very slight window where those deer are going to have to be in order to smell you. And we've done this before where we'll come in and those deer might feel like they're downwind of the danger up ahead, but unless they're on that exact scent stream, they're probably not going to smell you as long as that wind's blowing. You've seen it before in your tree stand sets. You see where the wind's blowing, and as soon as they get to that spot that you've identified right where that wind's blowing, that's when they smell you if they're going to. So that's the first thing that's going to run through my head is where I think they're going to go next and how, can I work that route to get in position and start to, let's say I've got to do a little loop on them. Let's say they're 100 yards out and I think they're going to go straight the other way on the other side where I'm at. Well, I'm probably going to do a loop and get around to where I think they're going to go next and come in from that angle just in case they decide to get up while I'm still trying to sneak in and go that direction.
Okay.
However, if the wind's blowing really strong and I know that I can close that gap to where they're at in a very short time, I might just, in that case, I would maybe just climb down and take my chances that they're going to lay there long enough for me to get in there and, close that distance. Obviously, the closer you get, the quieter and everything like that you've got to be. One thing that I have learned is if they can't see or hear you, move as fast as you possibly can to close that distance. Because I've had this happen in multiple cases where we could have moved faster and we didn't, and we were 5 minutes too late or just a couple minutes too late. So I would recommend moving as fast as you can in those situations to close that distance. And then once you're getting close, you got to put on the brakes. And the other thing that I found is I never try and take my eye off them. Every time I'm taking a step, I'm not trying to move my head a lot. I'm keeping my eyes on them, and I might glance down at where I'm going to go next, but before I move, I'm glancing right back up and watching them, because multiple times this has happened a lot where, they might hear something and they might kind of look your way for a little bit, and then they decide, well, that was a bird or a squirrel or whatever. It's whatever's over there is not a threat, but if you weren't watching them, they're going to pick you off moving. Movement is by far the biggest factor. And I've also had times where they do pick up a little movement and they stare you down for 5 minutes, and then they drop their head and pretend like they're not looking at you to try and get you to move again. Mm-hmm. It happens pretty much every time when they stare you down for 5 minutes. If they haven't blown out of the area and left, they haven't decided yet that A, you're a human, or B, you're a threat, one or the other, or a combination. And they'll almost always do that. They'll put their head, I wait for it, or we wait for it. We wait for them to put their head down, pretend like they're not looking to get you to move again. And almost always they'll snap their head up to try and get you to flinch or wiggle or something. And they might do that a couple of times. And a lot of times they'll grow comfortable if you just can freeze and hold that position. It might be 10, 15 minutes, and your muscles might be getting pretty wore down, but a lot of times they'll get comfortable and forget about you after they've decided that you're nothing at all. And then you can kind of go on your way again. So we have had that happen quite a bit. But definitely you got to keep your eyes on them when you're moving, because movement's probably what's going to kill you.
Yeah. So let's say you get to within range, and let's say they're still bedded there. The buck and doe's bedded. You were able to get within shooting range. What would you recommend someone do at that final moments? Do you try to do something to get that buck to stand up so you can get a shot, or will you just stand there and wait however long it takes till he naturally stands up?
That depends on the situation, but I'd say most of the times I'd wait. The problem with waiting is they can catch you off guard when they're gonna finally stand up, and all of a sudden you might not be prepared because it might be 2-3 hours, and all of a sudden they decide they're gonna stand up, and they do, and maybe they catch you, or maybe you can't get drawn in time because you might have a small window where you can get a shot in, or maybe they'll stand up and not give you a shot. Maybe they'll be, stand up and start in face straight away, right away. So I guess we've never taken a shot on a bedded deer. We've always pretty much waited for them to stand. There may be situations, say in like a wide open area, where you could take like a clump of a rock or something and throw it over to the other side of them to get them to stand up and look over away from you.
Right.
That maybe would be a good situation to do something like that. And there's one particular deer that I'm thinking of in my head where I was filming a buddy of mine, and I wish we would have done that. We got to about 12 steps of this deer, and he'd been there for I think 5 hours, and he just decided to stand up. And we had been kind of looking for something to throw on the other side of him, but just, I could have grabbed a camera battery or something and chucked it over there. And that would have been a good case to do it because we were in the wide open, and as soon as that deer stood up, it was probably going to bust us. He couldn't. He was in the wide open as soon as he stood up, but outside of that, he couldn't see us when we were sneaking in on him, really. So,
wow.
But most of the time, yeah, I'd probably recommend waiting if you can. That's all up to it depends on the situation and how comfortable. It's a determination for the person in that situation, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. So my final kind of question topic here, during this time of year, during the rut, are you doing any calling and rattling? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that and your strategy, when and how you use those tactics?
Sure. This season's the first season in a while where I've called more than I typically would. Usually what I like to do is lay quiet on a deer and not let him know I'm there at all if I'm going to move in on him, rather than try to get him to come. Because, he might come in downwind, and with two of us there, he might smell us, and we've had pretty good results spotting them and moving in on them or getting ahead of them. So we typically lay quiet. However, this season, this one particular spot, we weren't really, it was a pinch point. It was a hot spot. It was a spot that you had to set up on. You couldn't really still hunt it. It'd take you a half hour to still hunt, and a half hour after you left, a big one could come cruising through there. It's one of those kinds of spots. So it really made sense to sit there and set up. And that was a spot where, occasionally I would hit the horns or whatnot. And it was also about 100 yards from some private land where I knew that there might be a buck right on the other side that, maybe he wasn't going to come or whatever, that I can't do anything about other than rattle or something of that nature. And so, called in a couple bucks in that particular spot, utilizing that. Typically when I hit the horns, what I like to do, I like being on the ground for one, because you can rake the leaves, you can take the antler and make it sound like a deer walking, by pounding the base into the leaves. And you can do a lot of that type of natural sounds,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, to go with the antlers. You can break sticks, and you can do that in the tree too, but the leaves, I think, is a important factor, especially on those days where they can hear it so well.
Oh yeah.
So I definitely like utilizing that. So, calling is kind of like a secondary means for me, I guess you could say. It's when nothing else is really, when nothing else is really going on, I'll give it a whirl kind of thing, or B, that deer's, there's no way we're going to be able to cut it off, or that deer's, over on private, and we need to get him on public if we can. And, it's situations like those, and I'll go to the calling.
Okay.
So.
Is there any specific? Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, when it comes to the calling, are you sticking to just a basic grunt, or do you like to throw in a snort wheeze, or do you have any specific types of sounds you like to make, or is that situational?
Definitely the snort wheeze I like to throw in on that. Myself, I haven't had nearly as much results out of, say, grunting as I have snort wheezing. I've had a lot more results out of that, it seems like. That, and like I said, just some of that natural sounds of, raking the leaves with the antler, or tickling them just a little. Sometimes I'll just lay the one antler in the leaves and just kind of hit it a little bit with the other antler, and I've had that, work just in, and a lot of times I'll start out with that in case there's one on top of, really close, so I don't hit them too hard, too long, or anything like that. But I definitely like the snort wheeze. It seems like it gets a lot of, and I just do it with my mouth. I don't think it has to be perfect. I've heard a lot of snort wheezes from deer, and some of them, it's like, really? That's a snort wheeze? So I've found that even imperfect snort wheezes right out of your mouth, they don't seem to mind at all.
Yeah, I'll tell you one way you shouldn't snort wheeze, though.
Okay.
You've probably seen the grunt tubes. They've got a regular grunt tube chamber, and then there's the second chamber that you're supposed to use for the snort wheeze. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's just basically just like a little funnel. Well,
Right.
in the heat of the moment, I had a big buck walking away from me, and I wanted to snort wheeze at him. And so I did a snort wheeze, but into the regular grunt tube chamber by accident. And so it sounded like a horribly sick duck call or something. It was so bad, and it scared that buck so far. It was horrible.
That had to be a bad day.
Was not good at all. So that's one way not to do it.
Right. Yeah, I know what you're talking about with those chambers. I used to have that one jury call that had it, or that mad call that had that chamber. That worked pretty good for reaching out with them. But lately, I've been just using my mouth, and like I said, I don't find where it has to be really that perfect to. And I like, because it's instantaneous. I don't have to reach for anything, or I can just do it right there. But
I love the snort wheeze too. It seems on those big boys, it's one that can really turn them around. Right.
It's almost like they'll not pay any mind to a grunt, and you snort wheeze, and it's like, to a big one, it's like, all right, I've had enough.
Yeah.
Who are you, and what are you doing?
Yeah, we actually snort wheezed in like a 140, 150-inch 8-pointer just a couple days ago down in southern Ohio.
Wow.
Yeah, got him to 40 yards, but not quite within a shooting lane. So.
Sure. Bummer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you've seen it yourself. That I'd say, that's probably one of my most effective methods for calling is a snort wheeze.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Along with the antlers sometimes. But.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I think Jared, we're coming up on time here, but
yeah.
Gosh, we have covered some really interesting stuff that I think our listeners are gonna be able to take with them, and And I think you've opened a lot of our listeners' eyes to a totally different way of hunting that I think could work for a lot of people if they just would give it a try. And so I'm certainly thinking about different ways I can try to get on the ground a little bit more and try some of these things out, because it sounds like you're having a damn good time. So
it is. It's a fun time. You have those encounters on the ground, and even if you don't get them, even if you get close, I mean, it's an adrenaline rush, you know.
It is a whitetail adrenaline rush. You are right. So for people out there that want to see, want to check out your DVDs or learn more about whitetail adrenaline, where can they go, Jared?
There's two ways. They can go to our Facebook page, Whitetail Adrenaline, or they can go to our website, whitetailadrenaline.com. Perfect.
And the new DVDs will be out next summer? Is that going to be right?
Yeah, it'll probably be late summer, I'm guessing. That's when they've been coming out, I guess. It's a lot of work to go through all the unscripted content and make the video flow well and everything. So it's been taking me a little bit longer than I'd like it to. But
well, it seems like it's worth the time because you've been putting out some really, really entertaining videos. So I'll definitely be checking out the new ones, and I hope all of our listeners do too. And Jared, like I said, this has been awesome. So thank you so much for being here with us.
You bet. Thanks again, guys, for having me.
Yeah, and Dan actually had to drop off the line because his wife keeps calling him, so I'm going to give him some crap about that.
Okay.
but he wanted to tell me things. Yeah,
I was wondering. I was like, I haven't heard Dan in a while. Is he still there? I wasn't sure. So.
Yeah, you know how it is with wives. You gotta when they call, you gotta get back to him. So he's already her patience, I think, is already wearing thin since he's been hunting for like 11 straight days now. So
I gotcha.
Yeah, so it goes. All right, Jared. Well, thank you again, and good luck hunting.
All right. Well, thanks again, Mark.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, well, there you have it. Another episode of the Wired to Hunt podcast in the books, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a rating or review on iTunes. It's a huge help, so thank you in advance. Also, be sure to visit wiredtohunt.com/episode 32 for show notes and links from this episode. And finally, we'd like to thank our partners who help make this show possible. Big thanks to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Carbon Express Arrows, Huntsoft, Lacrosse Boots, Big & J Long Range Attractants, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. That all said, thanks so much for joining us today on the Wired to Hunt podcast. I hope the rut is rocking for you and that you're having a great time in the woods. So good luck, go hard, and stay wired to hunt.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.